Welcome everyone. Bienvenue to Wine and Wonks. And so I'm Taran Wasson, je m'appelle Taran Wasson, je suis président de IAPC-RCN, the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, National Capital Regional Group. And so I want to begin by a land acknowledgement. So here in the NCR, I just wanted to recognize that we're on unceded Algonquin territory. And I want to also tell you a little bit about IPAC. So some of you may be new to IPAC. IPAC's a great organization. I'm a little bit biased myself, but founded in 1947, 19 chapters across the country. I want to welcome our IPAC colleagues who are joining us from across the country as well. And we're dedicated to excellence in public administration. And so one of the things that we've tried to do over the past year since the pandemic started is retool our events and activities so that they're more in line and supportive to our main audience, which is public servants, but others as well who are interested in government, in public administration. And so it's not just public servants from one government, from the government of Canada, like many of us, but also from all governments in Canada. So provinces, municipalities, territories, and First Nations and Indigenous government as well. And so I just want to let everyone know that this event in particular, we designed it so that it's a little bit of a fun element to it. And so we're doing on a Friday, souvent on dit vendredi en français. Alors c'est vraiment un événement vendredi, puis même l'heure d'événement, c'est un 5 à 7, so 5 to 7. So very much in that spirit, we thought that this event was one that would cover our core mandate of excellence of public administration by having a panel discussion, but also added a little bit of a fun element to it with the wine, the Friday, the vendredi. So welcome everyone. I won't spend too much time, but I wanted to pass it over to our moderator for today, David Dewar, who's a director with Western Economic Diversification. Dave?
Thanks, Taryn. My name is David Dewar. I'll be your MC for tonight. And I'm really glad to be hosting this event because it marries two of my favorite things, wine and public policy. So there are three components to this event. First, a panel discussion on wine sector policy. D'abord, une table ronde sur la politique du secteur vitivinicole. Then, a tasting of three excellent Canadian wines. Ensuite, une dégustation de trois excellents vins canadiens. And finally, breakout groups to discuss wine and network. Et enfin, petit groupe pour discussion et vin et réseautage. Okay, let's meet the panelists. So, in no particular order, we've got Tom Rosser, who's an Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. As ADM, he is responsible for leading major policy issues on behalf of the department, including wine policy. What a fantastic job. We also have Asha Hingarani, is the Director of Government and Public Affairs at Wine Growers Canada. She has a background working on Parliament Hill, in journalism, and in government relations. She's also a graduate of the Algonquin College Sommelier Program. Also, we have Andrew Rasta, who's a wine agent at the Byward Wine Market, where you may have gone to buy your wines for tonight. Andrew's days are spent shaping restaurant wine lists with Ottawa's sommeliers, helping private clients fill their cellars, and hosting wine tastings, dinners, and wine education sessions. Another pretty good job. Debbie Shing joins us from Toronto, where she is on faculty at the IWEG Drinks Academy. She's also co-founder of the nonprofit organization Vinequity, as well as Diversity Committee Lead for Drinks Ontario, the province's trade association for importers of beverage alcohol. And last but certainly not least, Marie-France Boudreau-Champagne is program coordinator for the sommelier and bartending programs at Algonquin College, where she has taught since 2014. Marie-France also owns Champagne and Wines, a company specializing in consulting, food and wine events, and in-home/corporate wine tastings, and is vice president of the National Capital Sommelier Guild. So big welcome to all the panelists.
Thank you.
So for the participants, during this part of the event, your audio has been turned off. you have any questions for the panelists, please type them dans la langue de votre choix using the chat function, and I will read them aloud. All right, let's move on to the policy panel discussion. Round one, panelists, please keep your answers to 2 minutes. We'll start off with Tom. Can you tell us a little about the wine sector in Canada, including the role of your department in supporting grape growers and winemakers?
Bien sûr, David, et merci pour l'invitation d'être ici cet après-midi. J'aimerais commencer par souhaiter à tous et à toutes un bon vendredi. I am under no illusion that I'm the highlight of the evening, so we'll try to be brief in my reply. But there's I think we have a robust partnership with the wine industry in many respects in terms of our vision for the agri-food sector more generally and its future. The wine industry just accentuates a lot of the positives around that. First of all, it's I mean, one of the things that we as a department try to do with the broader agri-food sector is move to higher value added so that we aren't as a country just selling raw commodities, but are selling value added goods. And there are a few examples of products from the primary agricultural outputs through to the finished product that exemplify that better than wine. Wine, or certainly the Canadian wine industry, has been a growth success story. It's been growing. It's about a $1.3 billion industry. So it's significant, albeit perhaps not among the largest segments of the agri-food value chain, but it's been growing rapidly. I think about 4.5% or thereabouts a year over the past decade. Something else that really is important to us as a department is branding Canada and Canadian products. And I think wine is a really important component of that. I know just as when I'm trying to choose a holiday destination or I'm planning to visit somewhere, I mean, certainly I'm that much more motivated to go to a destination that's known for its food, and wine is obviously a really important part of that. If you think about the proliferation of e-commerce, even before the pandemic, in a market like China, for example, where e-commerce is a really important way people buy groceries, some of the big e-commerce sites there will have country pages. So there'll be an Italy page and a France page and so on and so forth. And I think as we we think about branding Canada and Canadian food more broadly, having wine be part of that story is a really important element. Just one other thing I want to touch upon quickly, and that's the importance of wine tourism. The number of, I mean, obviously this year was a little bit anomalous, but also in the hundreds. I think it's in excess of 1 million people a year typically visit the 650 wineries across the country. And again, in terms of telling the story of Canada, some of the best restaurants in the country are located on wineries, and I think as part of that brand and that image, that's a really exciting trend too, and we have a number of partnerships with the wine industry on marketing, on innovation, on certification systems that hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about a little later, but I've probably gone on longer than I should have already. So I'll leave it at that for now, David. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Tom. I'll now go over to Asha. Can you tell us a little about your organization, Wine Growers of Canada, and about the policy issues you work on?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to speak on these panels, especially among people that I know and recognize. So it's always that's always nice. Wine Growers Canada. So we used to be the Canadian Vintners Association, but we rebranded just in January 2020. So, and the reason for rebranding, and I'll just touch on that because I get that question a lot, is because we wanted to make sure the government saw us as farmers first. And a lot of the times, and when I go to speak on these panels or speak to people, they ask me, they're like, well, what's a vintner? So that word wasn't really connecting with people. So we really wanted to, and we went through a whole process of this, seeing what would really connect farmers and the wine industry and that grower aspect, because number one, we are growers first before anything else. So we used to be the Canadian Vintners Association, but now we're Wine Growers Canada. And our partners across the country, which were the British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and BC, have also rebranded and changed their name to Wine Growers BC or Wine Growers Nova Scotia, and that's just to show the industry unity. So if you do see that pop up on your social media, it's something new and something we're certainly proud of in the industry. Well, we represent 100% Canadian grown wines, VQA wines, as well as the international Canadian blend producers. So that represents about over 90% of the whole wine production in Canada. So we do represent the vast majority of the industry. What we are not is a marketing association. So we are not out there marketing wines. We're a trade association. So we deal with specifically with policy issues. Over the last year, our main priority has been, well, one, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, is of course interprovincial trade, as well as we spent over a couple of years actually during the whole NAFTA negotiations dealing with that and how that would affect the industry. We touch on social responsibility, which is something that has certainly come up with our members recently. So we're trying to engage more on that and show that wine tastes better in moderation. And that's the message we want to put forward. Of course, we are focused on COVID recovery right now. A lot of our wineries don't have access to, the LCBO, for instance, if you're in Ontario. So their main way to sell their wines is through the cellar door. So COVID kind of restricted that access, and a lot of our wineries are suffering right now. So they're turning to direct to consumer as a way to reach those consumers. So that's something we are focused on right now, and what that means for wineries, and how they're restructuring their tasting rooms and going towards a reservation system versus having crowds of people come in. And what we're kind of hearing, just for your background, is that wineries are actually loving this reservation system. Those are that are allowed to open up now, because you get that more one-on-one experience with the customer, and they're actually selling more wines, and people are signing up for their wine clubs. So instead of having crowds come in and you're getting tastings at the tasting bar and not really interacting with the representative behind the counter, you actually have that more one-on-one experience and the time to actually learn about the winery, learn about the wines you're tasting. So it's going to be very interesting how, when we start opening up again across the country and our wineries see how they've adjusted during the pandemic, if they'll go back to systems that were before. Of course, we deal with tax reform. Excise tax on wine is something that we're very engaged in. Cannabis, we monitor closely because it is a competing product for us. So it's something we have been monitoring. And of course, environmental regulations. Our wineries are, try to put forward that sustainable message. So that's something that we are quite engaged in as well.
All right, cool, thanks. And it's interesting that both you and Tom touched on wine tourism, which is certainly something that I try to factor in when I'm planning vacations in Canada or elsewhere. Andrew, can you tell us a little about your experience as a wine agent in Ottawa? And
Absolutely.
what are some of the challenges you faced during the pandemic?
Well, in the first place, as a wine agent, I've been selling primarily about 85% to restaurants, and then the rest to private customers. And when the pandemic hit, that pretty much brought me to zero restaurant business, and I had to pivot everything to be entirely to private customers. And that posed quite a challenge. And in the past, I've worked with wineries. I've done harvest at wineries. So I've kind of understood the whole business through and through. And so what Asha was touching on, where the cellar doors are having an issue with the movement of people coming through, we saw the same issue on the restaurant industry side, where everything essentially ground to a halt, and we had to rethink how we were doing it and really pivot to sell directly to private customers. And so the tricky thing is, when you're a wine agent, because the LCBO retail side doesn't have agents, they have people who work in the stores. And when you're a wine agent, you sell wines from what's called the consignment program, or specialty services, by the case. You can't break up those cases. They have to be sold by the case. They're shipped directly to someone's house via the wine agents. And so now we were needing to sell cases directly to private customers, and not everybody is entirely comfortable or aware that you have to buy wines fully by the case, et cetera. So the pandemic really changed things in that it really shut the tap off on the majority of what our business was. Our whole business model really had to flip and go entirely private customers. And luckily, the government threw us a few bones pretty early on, and the type of things we thought would never, ever be possible, like private wine shops, bottle shops, the LCBO stores releasing a bit of control, started to happen, and that's been fantastic. There's a lot of things that can be made better about it, but as you mentioned in your little introduction there about me, I also have partnered to open a wine store where everybody who's on today, I see a number of familiar names from orders as people were admitting from the waiting room. Have the Byward Wine Market downtown, and we're trying to create that type of retail environment. So that was the tricky part of the pandemic, that we've, to use the cliche word of 2020, overused word of pivoting. And the other thing that's been difficult in Ottawa from a policy perspective is the National Capital Region. Like, everybody considers this essentially a big city. The public considers it a big city, whether you go across the river, this and that, for various things. It's most blatant when I have visitors from wineries around the world, whether it's France, Argentina, Italy, wherever, and they look at a map and they don't realize why we're only operating in the bottom 2/3 of the city. Why aren't we going up across the river? It's like, oh, that's Quebec, and it is entirely separate. I can do zero business over there. I'm relegated to this half, and here's why. And then when wines come through the LCBO in the retail setting or through the SAQ, they often have entirely different pricing structures. Even wines that with one of the companies I work with, I represent a couple different portfolios. We can represent the same wine both in Quebec and Ontario, but it'll have sometimes a drastically different price. And by no fault of our own, we are not increasing the price on one side or the other. We would like to see it equal across the board, but it can be dramatic. And that affects our business on this side. Sometimes I can't sell a wine to a restaurant in Ontario because the price at the store at the SAQ is maybe $10 less than the wholesale licensee price to Ontario restaurants. And I think that's a significant policy issue. We'll be talking more about interprovincial things later, but maybe I'm over my time, so I'll stop there. But that's kind of been my rundown in Ottawa.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. And it's great to see the Byward Wine Market open. I enjoyed popping in to buy those wines, and I think you're going to see me again down the road.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
All right. Debbie, can you tell us a bit about your experience as a wine agent in the Toronto market and about your work as an advocate for greater diversity and inclusion in the wine sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, good evening, everyone. Bonsoir à tous. Je vous remercie pour l'honneur d'être sur cette discussion avec tout le monde. I'm going to focus my answers in English for the time being because that's where I've done my research. Mais si vous en avez des questions en français, je vous en prie de, s'il vous plaît, me demander dans le chat box. So my career started in wine in 2003, and suffice it to say, much of the scene has not changed today as it relates to diversity and inclusion. There were no people that looked like me in the business in 2003, and today there are a few, but still few and far between. So I want to focus on sharing some facts and numbers with you all nationally and across North America, and just kind of explain why diversity and inclusion are important. And then we can, when we get to the second part of the discussion, talk about, I'd really like to focus on a few topics that I think are relevant to promoting both of these issues. So, you know, today, fully 1 in 4 people identify as BIPOC, and I'm going to use a couple terms here that, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, BIPOC represents Black, Indigenous, and people of color. En français, je crois, c'est NAPOC, Noir, Autochtone, Personne de couleur. So fully 1 in 4 people identify as BIPOC in Canada. And, particularly when we look at urban neighborhoods, that number probably goes close to 1 in 3. And studies have shown that, by the year 2025, that number is going to continue to increase even more. And what's, even more prevalent is also the youth of our population. So again, by 2025, across North America, about half of the entire population is going to be under the age of 40. So hopefully myself included. I haven't done the math yet, but we'll see. Where this comes into play, and I'm going to share some pretty interesting economic facts later, is that, as these numbers increase, I think we need to see according measures, in the trade, particularly in, the wine business, where we don't see as much representation. How is it that, in our so-called multicultural spaces, we see, the gradual acceptance of, let's say, multicultural music on, mainstream radio? We see, different cultural, like ethnic shows on Netflix, for example. And, it's not the right response, but it's at least a step in the direction. There's at least one, international aisle in the supermarket. But yet in the spaces where wine is consumed, generally these spaces were designed by and for a non-racialized population. So I just kind of wanted to present some facts and, hopefully prompt some questions from the audience later on for when we discuss, this in a little bit more detail. But yeah, suffice it to say, I think that a few things need to accelerate, because again, demographics are shifting very rapidly in our country. So I think recruitment and job creation, those things going hand in hand, professional development, and also exposure of wine and wine appreciation in BIPOC-friendly spaces, I think will be very important in the years to come. And I'll address that in a bit more detail in the next section.
Awesome.
Debbie, if you don't mind, I just want to say, great. Thank you we're working at Wine Growers Canada on a diversity and inclusion charter. So for the industry. So having that knowledge, I might pull you in and perhaps bring you into the committee if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I'd be more than pleased to. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Debbie. And Marie-France,
yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the different types of roles in the wine sector and the role of the Algonquin College Sommelier Program in supporting human capital development in the sector?
Absolutely. I'll reverse the question a little bit. Bonsoir tout le monde. Thank you for having us, and look forward to all of the discussions today. So I'll give a little bit of background about our program to begin with, because we kind of need to start there. So we've been around for 29 years now, and what started as a 4-course, rather basic program is now a 600-hour program, including 15 courses. And so we're really proud of what we've achieved over the years. So you mentioned Asha as a graduate of the program. Just going through the pages of participants on the call tonight, I saw at least 6 or 7 more, which makes our program within the college extremely interesting. And we have a demographic that no other program has. And we are now addressing that and treating that way. So we became a full-time program and a Ontario College certificate only 3 years ago. We're going into our 4th year, and we've made some major changes since. So in becoming a full-time program, we now have what we call a program advisory committee, comprised of members of the industry from, we have wine agents and brewery owners and winemakers. And so we have this group of people, and they were telling us, it's awesome you're graduating all these people but you're calling them sommeliers, and they're kind of not, right? So since we have a program advisory committee, we've really separated those coming to us to learn more about wine and that are passionate about wine, and they are now doing a wine appreciation certificates. And what we call our sommelier program now is really a lot more tailored to the industry. So we've spruced up one of the courses that some of you have taken called Sommelier Advanced, and we've given that more hours, and it's, you know, more into the business of wine now. And we're addressing diversity issues, and we're addressing service issues now that we were not addressing before. We now have a restaurant service course. We've added a spirits course because the cocktail industry is so important right now, and the cocktail trend is so important right now. So our graduating success rate is quite impressive. We like to say that we have a grad pretty much in every restaurant in the city, but we also have grads that become, and people in the industry that are product consultant with the LCBO. You can work in a winery. We have many students working in PC or in Niagara, or even locally here in Ottawa, and a few wineries that we have here. We have students that become event planner, consultant, that do a lot of in-house or corporate tasting. We have many that have become wine agents. So it's really, we always say that it's a business where, you know, we want you to dabble, and to help you and to help students do that, they also have to complete a 40-hour field placement, which we kind of used to leave them to their own, you know, way to finding those hours and what they were going to do, where now we do a little bit more hand holding and place people in positions where we think they're going to excel, and we want them to try many different things. And we've created some more projects for them, especially with the pandemic, as Andrew was saying, this overused word of pivoting. I cannot ask any students right now to find a 40-hour placement in a restaurant. So it really became up to us to come up with, you know, additional work and projects, and so we're having a lot of fun with that. So happy with the progress we've made and the way we were able to turn things around during this time.
That's great, and it's good to get an update on the program. As a proud graduate of the program myself, it's good to see that it's going strong and getting better and better.
It is indeed.
All right, round two. Again, please keep your answers to 2 minutes. The first question is for Andrew. Now, Tom told us a bit about how the federal government is supporting the wine sector, but it seems like some provincial governments are just as engaged in controlling and regulating its production and sale of wine along with other alcoholic beverages. How do regulations on alcohol compare to regulations on other products such as tobacco and cannabis?
Well, they are, in a word, they're far more archaic and strict than I think than anything else, at least that I've come across. More broadly, interprovincially, there's an annoyance and a frustration for wine agents and the public that each province is essentially treated like another country, charge nearly the full amount of import taxes that French or American wines would get for BC or Nova Scotia. So aside from the annoyance and the difficulty for ourselves and our suppliers internationally to have these various levels of compliance, you have the EU and NAFTA type deals that the federal government will essentially negotiate and set, but then everybody has to negotiate with each province specifically with all the different layers of taxes and various procedures and paperwork and everything. And it's on top of the whole frustration of needing to pay significantly more for having BC wine in Ontario when it arrives here, or vice versa. There's this added layer of just business complexity, like blockades. And I understand how much revenue it brings to the provincial government, but I think it would be a higher net benefit to the province if it was opened up to greater entrepreneurship. So, like, why are there these regulations in the first place? Before we get to the other, very quickly, before we get to the other industries, like alcohol, if we back up a bit, during Prohibition, alcohol was a protected and prohibited substance. When Prohibition was over, that's when liquor boards were created to control the liquor, like medicine, to essentially to guard against overuse and addiction. Religion had a strong role in this and the perception and support for control of it. But Since then, times have changed. Societal norms have drastically moved forward and have modernized. Much of the Western world, if we'll call it that, has advanced beyond this, but Ontario and much of Canada has not. I would say most of Canada. And thinking about industries that have emerged since then, cigarettes, pharmaceuticals, and recently cannabis, all of these have fewer restrictions than alcohol does. And recently, like cannabis was a very arrestable offense with significant jail time. Alcohol has never had that in modern history. So how does cannabis essentially pass alcohol in openness and entrepreneurship with less regulation? So essentially, I guess my point is that government needs to catch up to the rest of the world, and I'm saying provincial government for the most part, to the rest of the world and comparable industries in Canada that it already has allowed to be more open. They speak about entrepreneurship and nurturing business, but then there's these massive handcuffs on industries like this. So even something like cannabis, I keep pointing back at this, but if you drive down the street, you look like Tokyo Smoke, Dutch Love, Supret, like all of these names of these independent businesses that are able to sell what was a very, like, not even controlled substance, prohibited substance more freely than alcohol is allowed. And even now when we have bottle shops like mine, that are more allowed to do it. As all of you know, you had to buy an item of food with it because we are on a restaurant license, which is the only way anybody's allowed to do this outside of the LCBO, et cetera. That it doesn't have that same level of compliance or required with like pharmacies or cannabis. You have the permits you need to get or the degrees you need to have, be a pharmacist and be in compliance with the operation, but your supply isn't controlled the same way. Earlier when I mentioned how it is being a wine agent where we have to sell wines by the case, when we pick up those wines in the Toronto downtown LCBO consignment warehouse, every single customer, we have to provide to the LCBO their name, their address, and their phone number. And this dates back to the early days when liquor was controlled as medicine to guard as overuse. They used to call people every so often to check in if they were actually drinking this, if they were over drinking, et cetera. And this is kind of a hangover of all of that. So while all these other industries have moved past, alcohol is still kind of sitting here handcuffed and scratching its head why cannabis, the thing that was like jail time 10 years ago, is now far freer.
David, if you don't mind, can I just add just two things to that, just to jump off? So just to highlight kind of the reality of this and to jump off what Andrew said, 46 out of 50 states in the US now allow direct-to-consumer delivery. In Canada, only 3 provinces have opened their borders. So that's just in comparison to how behind we are. We recently did a poll at Wine Growers Canada, and 95 of Canadians believe that we should have direct-to-consumer to allow them to access wines from across the country. So it just baffles me that we're still talking about this today, especially when there's been federal legislation 9 years ago to allow the provinces to open up their provincial borders.
And that as a direct to customer, that was a fantastic move. Bill C-311, it is technically legal federally now for any of you as a private customer to place an order with a BC winery and then ship it to you in the mail. Federally, absolutely legal. Provincially, still illegal. They're not going to do anything about it. And I think they don't really care or they turn their head, but restaurants can't do that because restaurants have to be sold all of their liquor on their liquor license. And the only way that's possible is through the LCBO, whether it is through the LCBO store shelves or whether it's through the consignment program, like what agents like myself work in, it still has to go through the LCBO and be taxed. So this is why if you have a $50 bottle of BC Cabernet, that's what it costs in BC, it's going to be $85 cost here and then $175 on a wine list here, if not more. And that's just egregious, and it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do the winery any good because everybody's seeing this overpriced wine that nobody's going to be purchasing, and it's not doing the consumer any good. And I don't know if it's really a net benefit to the province with the amount, like it's such a small amount of business that BC would be shipping here anyway, that just, I don't know. Sorry, that moved a little bit from like a policy point to a rant, but.
It's all good. Now's maybe a good time to introduce one of the questions we got for anyone else who wants to jump in. Any hope that the pandemic will get these regulations rethought?
If I can just one quick bit on that, yes, to whoever asked that, because we've already seen that. Like I mentioned earlier, I would never have, like, I've been in the wine business now for 14 years, almost 15, and it was a dream to open a wine shop. I never thought it would be possible. I thought I'd have to move to the States or be somewhere else because of how clamped down the LCBO has been on control. And cliche, but it took a pandemic, and now it's new ACGO rules. We're allowed to do this. There's a lot of work to be done to open it up more, to make it more retail, entrepreneur friendly, direct to customer. But yes, the pandemic has significantly made things easier. As difficult, let's put it this way, it's the silver lining of the worst case scenario ever.
David, I might jump in on that point, and I can't really speak to, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about interprovincial trade, but can't speak a lot to the specific issues, irritants that Andrew was addressing. But on the broader question of regulation and the pandemic, I think as part of an emergency response in all kinds of areas, whether it was rules around meat inspection and what federal inspectors do versus provincial inspectors, and how we label hand sanitizer, there were a whole bunch of rules that we had to, and how, like, documents and application forms that needed wet signatures, all kinds of stuff where we had to learn really quickly how to regulate, change how we do things in response to a crisis. And I think we learned a lot from that. And I hope, the kind of lessons of innovation that I think you saw lots of examples of as part of COVID response won't just go by the wayside as the pandemic recedes, but are things that we can learn upon and build upon, and how it is possible to affect change in the regulatory space and do it quickly when you really have to, is one of the broader lessons for me from COVID.
Mm-hmm. It's really easy to, once you allow something, it's very hard to take it away, right? So now that consumers are getting used to it, or the local supply chains are getting used to it. I mean, I just thinking of the example of how many wineries quickly innovated and made hand sanitizer, right? So it's innovation is a huge part of this. And I really hope that they see that, allowing interprovincial trade and allowing Canadians to order wine direct from, BC, if you're in Ontario, for instance, isn't going to ruin the economy, isn't going to, cause the LCBO to go out of business. In fact, it actually proves to educate more Canadians about the product and the wines that are out there. And if the LCBO sees that wine is being ordered a lot, perhaps they would carry it, right? So I think it serves as an education tool.
Well, if I could just jump on that, another thing, like, the LCBO is fantastic in many ways, but one thing it is not is something that seeks out trends or sets them. It is so far behind the 8 ball in every trend possible. It is more concerned with selling 2 containers full of Baileys at Christmas than even introducing the idea of natural wine to the general public. Who have no idea what orange wine or natural wine or anything is. They come to people like me or to cool restaurants and wine bars and ask, hey, I heard about this thing, but they don't have any at the LCBO. Yes, part of that is scale production, and you can't really have it on such a mass distribution, but it's available at the SAQ. And so if the LCBO has proven time after time with trend after trend to not get it, and to not be someone who sets the mark and can be a trailblazer, but following trends that are 5 years old, it's at least the best thing they can do is open up the market to allow more of the restaurateurs, the wine agents, the people that graduate sommelier programs, the people that have that added keen interest to entrepreneurially add something that is a net benefit to the province outside of the massive taxation.
Absolutely.
Well, this brings up a question that was just asked in the chat. What is the benefit of having an LCBO or SAQ as opposed to more of a free market or direct-to-consumer approach?
I think in the very short answer is taxation. I think that's the only benefit we can really think of, to have like one avenue for such a large amount of net revenue to the tax. I'm not sure if it still is, but last time I looked, like 5 or 6 years ago, it was the largest contributor, the single line item of tax to Ontario. And that, like, they're not going to let go of that very quickly. How many different election cycles have conservative governments said, like, we're going to do away with the LCBO? Then they get into the office, they're like, oh boy, how are we going to make up that many billion? Maybe we can't do that.
Might be also one of the reasons why never closed during this pandemic, right?
Absolutely. But then when the pandemic comes and there's so many more challenges that the LCBO is absolutely not equipped to handle, then I don't know, they did a smart thing in allowing it to be opened up first under the auspices of just trying to save restaurants and that business and people's jobs. But then I think they started to see that these hints of entrepreneurship were really seeds that were planting or allowing to be planted that were going to grow into something more positive, as we're starting to see now.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Debbie.
Thanks, David. I guess, not to play too much of devil's advocate, but in my personality, am a little bit like this Pinot Noir, elegant, but a little bit spicy. So having worked in the government liquor board in the past, so I actually started my career working at BCLDB. One of the important things about a monopoly, besides obviously generating like a ton of, revenue to contribute back to society. And I'm not saying that I'm, pro, one way or another forever, but they actually do have a mandate to bring in a huge assortment of products from all over the world. And obviously, not only that, but to uphold the production and support the marketing of locally produced, since we're talking about agri-food and we have a few people from there on this panel, there is a mandate to support all the different, let's say, buying categories in my trade terms. So, wines from Greece, wines from Spain, et cetera, et cetera. Conversely, when you look at a totally privatized market such as Alberta, what you see are the proliferation of, obviously it's good for, small and medium, SME, like small, medium enterprises, where you see lots of private LRS, licensee retail stores. They have, lots of, private chains, stuff like that. It's great for independent business, but what they often do, these, smaller chains or even larger chains to that effect, typically they stock basically the best sellers, because if you are guaranteed a sure amount of income as an independent business owner by selling just, Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Sprite, etc., why would you choose Fanta? Why would you choose, Grape Crush? Why would you choose, etc., like cream soda or whatever? Because those are the sure bets. And that is often the same thing that occurs when the liquor industry swings to the other side of the pendulum and it's fully privatized. What you typically do see are, independent stores that, and hope I'm not offending anyone here by saying that, all you see is Budweiser, Labatt Blue, Corona, Smirnoff Ice, and, XYZ locally and international top brands. You don't see the support of, smaller, very well-deserving, wine producers and wineries, et cetera, especially from international regions. So there is a bit of homogeneity, and that runs the risk of, again, maybe, less diversity, more diversity on the business side, but less diversity on, consumer options. So that's a thing that I just want to bring up.
If
Well,
If I could just, do we have time for a small little point on that, David?
very quickly.
I totally agree with you, Debbie. The one other thing I would say though is, and I completely agree, when it gets to the larger chain kind of business model, it also becomes a race to the bottom and just who can outprice everybody on the cheapest things. But something when you have entirely a public monopoly, and they are absolutely mandated to be buying from a diversity of places, but those aren't regularly stocked. One of the biggest criticisms of the LCBO and vintages in like the finer wines is, oh my God, I went and found this amazing wine, which was in vintages, and then
Now it's gone.
later and it's gone. And there's nowhere else you can get it unless you go to the agent who imports it and hoping that they have it in stock by the case at the time, which often they don't, because they're not going to stock something in consignment at the same time as it's on the retail shelf through vintages. And so if you have either a semi-private system like in BC, where you can have the BCLB and then all your Liberty Wine and Spirits and whoever else, that you can possibly have more of that ongoing selection. Yes, there's going to be the cheap stores that only offer the Budweiser type products and race to the bottom on pricing, but there's always going to be like the Vine Arts or the Liberty or the whatever that are going to be offering like the cool stuff that smaller niche market is going to have at least available to the public.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think that's where it's important to really, build measures again as some of the, the generation that really established the current, liquor laws and legislations and structures as we know it. As they start aging within the population, we really need to find ways to, cultivate a little bit more, whether it's wine knowledge or support for small entrepreneurs or just creating jobs for a more, diverse wine sector. I really do think it will help to contribute to that, vibrant, wine commerce that, you're highlighting there, Andrew. And I guess I was saving this for the other question coming up, but I'll bring up a cool fact that I found, which was a 2018 study by Boston Consulting Group found that companies that have more diverse management structures, and again, diversity meaning a higher representation of BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, and persons with invisible and visible disabilities, they can typically experience 19% higher revenues than non-diverse workforces due to the different perspectives when it comes to business innovation. So I found that really interesting, and I do see that being applicable, in our sector, in the market here.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that idea of diversity, and Debbie, you talked a bit about this in the first round of questions. I'm wondering what policy changes or government support could be useful to help accelerate greater diversity and inclusion in the backgrounds of people in the wine sector, and maybe I could ask Marie-France to take the first stab at that.
That's a good question, actually. Thanks, David. I think we just need to continue the discussion and continue being aware, and we need to continue. The fact that we still have to discuss it is part of the problem, and shows how, although we are getting a little further, we're not getting much further, much faster, are we? We're still talking about the role of women in the industry. Women still don't feel empowered. Women still feel like there's too much competition within themselves. We have Chris Roman here, and I think, Chris, you were part of that Twitter feed yesterday where women were saying, why are we not joining forces more? Why are we still feeling like we're not paid as much as our male counterparts? Why is over 70% of our business still run by men? So as far as policy, David, I'm not sure what we can do, but the work remains to be done. And, Debbie and Viniquity and the work that she does there is a great step in the right direction. And we need more of that all throughout the country.
Cool. Oh, thanks. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
I know you wanted to talk about your side of it, so I just want to.
Oh, thank you. I love it. You guys are tossing me these like wonderful, juicy softballs here. Thank you so much, David and Marie-France. Yeah, I guess things that I find that are really encouraging are that, at least in my current home province of Ontario, is that, leading organizations are putting together, some diversity committees and initiatives of, some of which I'm very proud to be involved in. So not only with Inequity, which is a group that I founded with 6 other BIPOC women to essentially identify, advance, and advocate for BIPOC people to be professionally and gainfully employed in the wine industry. But also Canadian Association of Professional Sommeliers, CAPS. I sit on the board of directors of the Ontario chapter, and we now have a quite robust diversity and inclusion committee that has some policy measures currently in progress, and then also Drinks Ontario, which David, you mentioned before. A couple things like for those committees that have been developed by federal government that I do want to kind of pull everyone's attention to, that I'm pretty excited about and that I do want to kind of throw my weight behind in terms of supporting is there's a really interesting initiative that was put together by federal government called the Federal 50-30 Challenge. And that's an initiative put in place where companies can pledge to adhere to a 50-30 policy of ensuring, gender equity and gender parity to, a 50-50 ratio, as well as a 30% representation of, again, BIPOC, LGBTQ, and visible and invisible disabilities, within their workforces. So, personally, I think that is a great step toward reflecting some of the demographic numbers that are already existing in Canada. And it's something that, I will be, pledging towards with my own company. So I also, besides all my volunteer work, I run my own wine agency called Cuvée Group. I will be pledging that for my own company as well, because I do think that that's important. And ultimately, I do think in addition to this 50-30 challenge, a couple other things I wanted to bring up are essentially, we talked about it quite a bit, with introducing measures like, potential wholesaling and whatnot, is the diversification of the monopoly market. So not just LCBO, but also the SAC, because again, a more diverse economy or more like diversification of revenue streams does lead to more innovation, more revenue for companies. And, the way that we operate now with, our pandemic bottle shops, it's not true retail because these operators such as Andrew are not buying wholesale. It's a secondary market where they're still buying at retail. And in fact, not only paying full retail, but also paying an extra licensee markup before they can even move a bottle out to the final consumer. So that is still a roadblock for small business. And I do think that is, while very much welcomed, I do think the way in which licensees and, small entrepreneurs are afforded this opportunity needs to be relooked at for sure. And then one final thing, I don't want to take up too much time, but it was brought up last week on our prep call, but something interesting that obviously engages a lot of racialized individuals in the Canadian wine sector is the temporary foreign workers program. And that came up a little bit when we were talking about agri-food on the prep call. And I just wanted to point out that in fact, these, the people that come into, BC and Ontario vineyards through the TFW program are in fact highly skilled, many of them coming from, say, Thailand, Caribbean, and Mexico, but they come and work in Canada's vineyards year after year and have actually very specialized roles and very highly skilled positions within each winery. And in fact, many wineries cannot produce the level of quality wine that they can without the involvement of these people. And I think something that's really important to look at, retaining this talent, fostering that talent, and even helping them to advance, within Canadian society, whether it's to help fast track immigration for those that actually want to become residents permanently of Canada, or to even just simply increase their living and compensation, or quality of life and compensation would be huge for them, because many of them, live, because they're temporary workers, many of them live quite huddled together in close quarters, and that hasn't been safe throughout the pandemic, and is wouldn't be a nice environment in any sort of regular scenario. So yeah.
Tom, would you like to jump in on the temporary foreign workers issue?
Sure, I can maybe offer a couple thoughts. Debbie's right, that our food system is heavily reliant on the 60,000 odd temporary foreign workers that come to this country each year. I know that, as Ash had said, winemakers are farmers first, and that is a segment of the industry, like horticulture and greenhouses, that does rely to a significant degree on migrant labor. And yeah, certainly as COVID had a way of highlighting certain inequities and congregate living settings that some temporary foreign workers live in is one of them. I mean, the government's committed to. In fact, we're in the midst of consulting on a housing standard for temporary foreign workers. There are, different classes of workers, and there are through various pilot initiatives and so on. Pathways to permanent residency for some types of workers in meat packing and other sectors. In general, that works, jobs that are full-time, full year lend themselves more readily to that kind of a solution than those that are more seasonal in nature. But they are an important part of the agri-food system, including the winemaking system. We need them. I think too, I was going to talk about, one solution is to, one lesson from COVID, I think, for the broader agri-food sector is some investments in automation to make some of these processes less labor intensive. There are some technologies that allow you to do that in different parts of the winemaking and grape growing process, and that may be part of the solution too in time.
Well, that leads me into my last question for you, Tom and Asha. We know that Canadian grape growers and winemakers are constantly innovating. We've talked about that already tonight, in areas such as crop protection techniques, experimentation with new wine varietals, and grape growing practices that minimize the environmental footprint. Can you tell us about some of these new innovative trends that we should all be aware of?
Do you want me to go first, Tom? I did some research on this one because it's always so intriguing to read about some of the wineries that are innovating. But I think we have to think of it in two ways. Innovation means so many things to different wineries based on whatever size you are and what cash flow you have to do the proper investments. So, I think about, I'm going to give two examples. I think one of my personal favorites in the Okanagan is Burling Owl. And they have done amazing work in terms of their wildlife preservation and making sure things like rattlesnakes, if they see rattlesnakes migrating through their vineyards, they make sure they protect them. Or nesting birds, they'll build kind of a barrier around the nest so the tractors don't go over the nest, run over the nest. In terms of their building, of the design of their building, they have innovative ways that they're making sure they're environmental friendly and sustainable. So they have the cash flow to be able to do that. And then there could be bigger wineries that, like Jackson and Triggs, or some of the wineries that you might see in Niagara or in BC, such as Mission Hill, that have invested in things like wind machines, so that when the crops, when the temperature drops below a certain degree, it doesn't ruin the crops. So I think their wineries are really thinking about different ways to innovate, but I think it really depends how you want to define that, because a winery could be innovating in a small way to make it more sustainable based on what they can do, or if they're lucky enough to have a lot of cash flow, they can do bigger innovations.
Tom?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I mean, maybe just start with picking up on some of the points that Andrew had made. That many of the regulatory irritants he talked about are provincial, um, but we do agriculture is shared jurisdiction in Canada. We do have a very robust federal provincial table with significant, like formal. With billions of dollars of cost shared programming and formal Fed-Prov agreements. And we do use that as a platform to try and promote liberalization of interprovincial trade. I mean, it's generally their regulations and rules that get in the way, not ours, but nonetheless, we do have a platform to try to advance that agenda and do take advantage of that opportunity. And I think some regulatory reform can allow for greater innovation of those in the private sector. But in terms of more direct examples of government supporting innovation in the sector, a couple of examples to share with you that I found kind of cool. One of them is we have a research facility in Summerland, British Columbia. And one of the things that they have done is using drone technology, have done GIS mapping for 5,000 vineyard blocks across the winemaking regions of British Columbia. So the Okanagan, the Fraser, Vancouver Island, etc. And what the GIS information allows winemakers to do is to have a very granular sense of what's going on in their fields to enable water management, nutrient management, nitrogen management, and that has a whole bunch of benefits. First of all, in winemaking regions of BC as elsewhere in the country, they're getting hotter and drier. Water management becomes that much more important. Nutrient management, the better you understand where your field has nitrogen and where it needs it, the more you can reduce the input intensity of your operations, reduce the need for things like nitrogen fertilizer, reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of your operation. And lastly, I'm cognizant that just about everybody on this panel, in fact, everyone on this panel knows more about wine than I do. That it can also these technologies and sort of the data that they glean can help not only reduce your environmental footprint, adapt to a changing climate, but also ultimately improve the quality of your product. Just one other thing I'll talk about really that I found kind of cool too, also from BC. There's a disease that, again, the wine experts will know more about than I do, called grapevine trunk diseases that I gather have been present in other regions of the world for thousands of years. There's ancient Greek texts, medieval texts that talk about them. We've worked with the wine industry to develop some molecular detection tools so you can find out their prevalence in Canada, and you can test nursery stock that's coming in to try and prevent the further importation of the disease. Just a couple of examples of some innovations that we are working with the wine industry on.
Awesome. That's really good to hear, Tom. We are a little over time, so I'm going to have to draw this section of the event to a close, but I see that there are some really good comments and questions in the chat, and I encourage everyone to try to pick those up in the networking session at the end. Taryn, I'd like to turn it over to you now to highlight upcoming IPAC events.
Thanks, Dave. So that was a fascinating conversation. I learned quite a bit about wine and different elements of the wine sector. And I actually love the sidebar conversations in the chat, a few tweets as well. So thank you everyone for contributing. Merci encore pour vos commentaires. So next up, if you enjoyed this event, hopefully you'll come back to IPAC. You'll sign up to be a member if you're not a member already. And you'll join us for our next event on February 17th, which is an anti-racism, specifically anti-Black racism event that we're doing, partly in spirit with Black History Month. And so we have a great lineup of speakers, 2 deputy ministers, 2 federal directors, an academic, as well as the chief of the Ottawa Police Service. So we know that there's racism, not just in one area, but in different sectors. And one of the things I mentioned before is IPAC isn't just federal, provincial, municipal, indigenous, territorial. So we really want to bring different perspectives together here in the NCR. And so please join us on February 17th for the anti-racism event. We can, I think someone's going to share some info in the chat about that event soon as well. After that, right afterwards, the following week, February 25th, we're actually doing an event on risk management. So what better time than the pandemic to think about risk management? So obviously, I'm sure risk management is something that's on your mind. A kind of one of those core kind of, maybe not the jazziest topics, but very a core element to good public administration is risk management. And so hopefully you'll join us on February 25th to learn more about risk management. And this is a collaboration event between IPAC-NCR, PPX, and our University of Ottawa Center of Governance. So please do join us on that event. We'll probably share that info as well in the chat. And I wanted to acknowledge Eric Champagne, who we're collaborating with for the University of Ottawa, who's also with PPX for that event as well. Let me just say a quick round of thanks to Dave for his awesome moderation, keeping the conversation going. And we're going to hear more from Dave soon. To all our panelists for your insightful remarks and your really great perspectives. To everyone who joined, thank you as well. And I also want to take a moment to thank our lead organizers for this event. So Howard Young, if you don't know Howard, you should definitely follow him on Twitter. He wears great socks. And Blair Jones, Blair, who I'm sure is from Nova Scotia, probably can vouch for the Nova Scotian wine tonight as well. So thank you everyone. Merci encore tout le monde. Hope to see you again. And hopefully you're really enjoying notre vendredi, notre 5 à 7 aujourd'hui, puis encore tous les commentaires dans le chat, puis the remarks from our panelists. Thank you. Merci. Bye.
Merci, Taryn. All right, now's the time you've all been waiting for, the wine tasting. We encourage all the participants to stay with us until the end of the event. Even if you weren't able to buy the wine, it should be a pretty good time nevertheless. Once again, if you have questions, please use the chat function. Encore une fois, si vous avez des questions, veuillez utiliser la fonction chat. Andrew, over to you.
All right. So I'll try keep this shorter than planned because I think because we're a little over time, I don't want to put the entire event over time. So I'll try and make it be a little bit more concise than I usually am. Anybody who knows me, I'm a little more in wine tasting and just wine in general. For me, context is everything. From a very sommelier perspective, it's often very analytical about the appearance, the smell, the nose, the palate, specifically trying to achieve almost like an objectiveness about the wine of what is being tasted, how and why. For me, for sure, have that and appreciate that. But to me, what's even more interesting is like the deeper context behind everything. Like, why is this so interesting? Why does this taste like this? Not this just does taste like this and why, but where does it come from? What built this? What is the context? And in Canada, we have a really unique opportunity to have a lot of different styles of wine. If you go to like Niagara, some places are starting to do better big reds, like Meritage blends, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, etc. Generally speaking, not the best thing from Ontario, but one of the best things you can get from BC, from Okanagan Valley in southern Okanagan. It's a desert out there, and it's an extension of the same desert in Washington State. It's so warm, there's cactuses there. Like you can get big red wines out of there. In Ontario, we're starting to specialize more in like Pinot Noir and Riesling, more cool climate grapes. You can't do Pinot Noir all that well in California, where you can do Cabernet Sauvignon and Zinfandel super well. So a sign of a wine region that is becoming more mature is not trying to do everything, but leaning into what you do well and do it really well. Like, they don't try and make Cabernet Sauvignon and Burgundy, and there's a good reason for it. I'm sure it would grow, but it would suck. Like, there's no point in doing it. And so they are legislated and regulated by the AOC on what exactly they can grow and why, because of the terroir. So we're really starting to see things like that start to emerge here, because all of Canada is quite a young wine industry. So all of that to say that Today, unfortunately, we couldn't have any BC wine on the docket just because of what was available at the time. But we have 2 different styles of wine from Ontario that I think are specialties of what we do here. And then also something that a lot of people didn't know is a thing is Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia had, let's start with that one. Anybody who has all 3 or has this one, we'll start with the sparkling. Nova Scotia is the youngest wine region to really start to become relevant. They've been making wine there for 50 years or so, but not in any really significant quality context. I'd say since maybe around 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, a few wineries really started to lean into trying to do something on a different level, not trying to be just like good for the local consumers, like some local wine that's cheap and available, but something that would compete on an international stage. Actually, the wine that we have, the Benjamin Bridge Brut, they were the first to really start to do this in, I think it was 2099, maybe 2001. They were consulting with, I think it was Perrier Champagne, and now they consult with Agripar and some top consultants from Ontario, Peter Gamble and Anne Sperling, who is the winemaker at Southbrook and also her own family winery, Sperling in BC. They flew out and helped plant the area and did the initial consultations and talked about Nova Scotia is way too cool of a climate to grow big grapes. It really needs, but when I say big grapes, I mean big, like big red wines. It needs to be things that need a cool climate, high acidity, and because it has such a long growing season, and people often wonder, little sidebar, when I say something like, this is one of the best bottles, in my opinion, and many wine writers' opinions as well, one of the best bottles of traditional method sparkling wine in North America, people often kind of cock their head or raise their eyebrows and they say, really, from Canada? And even more so, really, from Nova Scotia? I had no idea they make wine in Nova Scotia. So the cool thing about Nova Scotia is in the Annapolis Valley, which is around Wolfville, on that kind of, I don't know what it's called. I guess it would be like the southern peninsula of Nova Scotia, where the north shore is the Bay of Fundy. That's where the Gaspereau Valley is, which is a subset of the larger Annapolis Valley. And the Bay of Fundy never freezes. So in the winter, it's always cooler there because that water isn't frozen and it's moderating the climate to be a little bit warmer. And then in the summer, it's always there keeping things a little cooler. It doesn't get all that hot because it's this large body of water that's kind of protected, keeping the balance of the temperature. So you have this almost this graph that doesn't like spike up to high heat and then down to cold. It kind of goes up and really long from like maybe April to November. And you don't get a lot of ripening to ripen big red grapes there. So Cabernet Sauvignon is never going to do well there. Well, never now, maybe with climate change. But things like sparkling, where you want low sugar, high acidity, but a lot of flavor ripeness, that's perfect. And in terms of the terroir, it's such a geological mess of everything. It's so interesting. They can't even tell us at Benjamin Bridge or other places what exactly the soil is, because they're like, well, what meter? Like it's a little bit of everything. And so that contributes to the interesting terroir that the roots are digging into, but climactically, it's a big thing that contributes to the incredible elegance and balance of wine from there. And so they know they're a young region, so they didn't want to mess around and try to find their footing on their own for so long. So they brought in top consultants from Champagne saying, hey, check this out. Look what we have to work with. Here's some early examples. Let's put our heads together and help us, like, let's figure this out. Let's make this a big deal. And now 20 years deep, it really is. And people are starting to know it. So when we're tasting this, on first smell, you might notice some of that toasty, brioche, yeasty character. That's the first indication that this is a traditional method sparkling wine. which means it's aged on its dead yeast cells inside the bottle. We're tight on time, so we don't have a long conversation about what makes traditional method sparkling, but it is essentially the champagne method, the same way it's made in Champagne, but done here. And there is a bit of difference to this. It's not using entirely Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, as is done in Champagne. This also has L'Acadie and Ortega, which are, I think they were, maybe somebody else will remember and be able to correct me, but I think they were created at Cornell University as crosses there, or hybrids. So it's something that isn't really seen that often internationally. So it's become Nova Scotia's grapes, because nobody else really does it with any significance or major relevance. And there's a bunch of Chardonnay in this as well too. So you get that mineral, edgy, crisp, rich character, and done in the traditional method sparkling. So on the nose, you get that kind of brioche, toasty pear, ripe pear, kind of like pretty fruit notes, but also that like lean mineral, almost that salty sea breeze type of smell too, which is interestingly contextually, because that's where they are, but you get so much of that minerality as well. And on the palate, like, it's just so vibrant. You get this like zippy, crisp, citrus flavor that is that acidity, but almost like a dusting of salt. Like that minerality gives this nuanced layer of complexity that is really pretty. And with the bubbles, like that, I think I would assume that this is a grower champagne if I had it blind, and it just speaks to the quality of what we have going on in Canada, that at this point is young, but already making big waves. So moving on, trying to keep us on track. And of course, I don't know if there's any questions. Maybe I'll try plow through these kind of quickly. And if there's any questions in the chat, we can talk about them just on a strictly wine level before we move into breakout rooms. Next up, if you have the Redstone Riesling, and I would maybe do this one last, just because there is more sweetness than everything, but just kind of trying to watch out for everybody's glasses if you only have one and you're switching, so you don't have to wash it going back to the white with the red. So we'll save the Pinot for last. But this is very typical Ontario style Riesling. I don't know what this would equate to exactly in a German context, maybe an Auslese, like something off dry. There's enough residual sugar in there on the mid palate that you can taste, but also so much acidity that it braces it. And it's funny with wines like this, different tasters will pick up different things. Sometimes someone will say, oh my goodness, oh, that's so sour and dry, because their senses are more attuned to the acidity. Some people will taste it and be like, oh my God, that is way too sweet, because they aren't as tuned into the acidity and more into the sweetness. And what that says to someone like me is that this wine's achieving an interesting balance, because it has that residual sugar in its core, but it has this structure of bracing acidity around it. And that's the thing about balance in wine. You can have as much sweetness as you want, as long as you have more acidity to keep it in check and fresh and balanced and drinkable. Otherwise, it would just be goopy, syrupy, sweet wine that's not fresh or fun to drink. And this is a style of wine that Ontario does really well, because we are a cool climate. Of course, we all know how hot it gets in Ontario in peak summer, and many wineries have figured out like the right areas and terroirs and winemaking to make big wines. But really our thing has been cool climate wines, and Riesling does best in cool climates. This is why you don't see much Riesling in California or places like that. Or Southern Italy, etc. Redstone is a winery owned by Maury Tawes. So Tawes Winery, what we'll taste next, they started it, I think, in 2008. So 2008 was the first vintage. I think they opened it in 2010 as a winery. And It is right across the street from Malivoire and Cave Spring, so kind of on the downward slope of the Beamsville Bench, a bit of a warmer site than where they are around the corner on Cherry Avenue. So generally what they make there is some bigger reds and also just riper, slightly more New World style wines, whereas Taz, really their reputation and style has historically been on making like Burgundy style, old world style wines in Ontario. Maury Taz, he started First National Bank, so he can build a new winery every day if he likes. I think he owns half the country's mortgages. And so he has a couple wineries. Well, he's a partner in a winery in Burgundy, Marchand Taz, where he's partnered with Pascal Marchand, but owns a couple Grand Cru vineyards in Burgundy as well too. So this is someone who has like an incredible history and knowledge of Burgundy. And with that love, wanting kind of not to replicate it in Ontario, but to have a firm nod to that style and context in their winemaking. So with Redstone, it's just this, I think this is a straight up pure great example of Ontario Riesling. Yeah, that's really easy to drink and pretty. Nice, nice refreshing 5 à 7 Friday night wine.
There's a movie on CBC Gem about Maury Taz and Pascal Marchand called Grand Cru. That's quite interesting.
Is it? I haven't seen. I didn't know that there was.
Yeah, it's on CBC Gem.
Oh man, I know what I'm doing tonight.
It's awesome. And you really see the personality, and you see Marchand from, you know, Marchand's background from a young man getting to Burgundy, and Maury Taz there with him. And so it's quite fun. It's a interesting movie.
Yeah, they're both great people, and like Pascal, like I've been to the winery and stayed there, and like they have a really great place right in Nuit Saint George. It's with like great under the street cellars and everything. It's like really the picture of like ultimate Burgundy. So if they feature that in the doc, then I'm sure, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in seeing that again. So with that said, let's move on to the Pinot Noir. So this one is the Grower's Blend, which you can also get in the LCBO. This is one wine that we are carrying only because they ran out of their usual Pinot Noir that we carry, and they gave us this one as a replacement. But this is their Grower's Blend. So there's a couple estate vineyards that go into this, but this is also where they work with a number of growers that they have longer term relationships with, and Paul Pender, the head winemaker, controls the viticulture. So they're not just buying grapes on the open market of varying quality that they're just going to crush and ferment and put into the wine. This is something that they are very involved with all the way through the harvest and the vintage throughout the growing year, and have input and say on how it's going to be grown, because they come in and harvest it. It's essentially like their own grown operations, except they don't own the land. Somebody else does, and they just direct the viticulture for how they want it done. So they call it Grower's Blend as a nod to the fact that they aren't estate grapes, but everything Taz does, they have a very significant hand in growing and the style of. So the thing about Pinot Noir, I don't know how many people on the call have the Pinot or are very familiar with Pinot. Maybe it's the first time, but very briefly, sometimes people taste Pinot and they're like, it's too thin, it's too light, I don't like it, or it's not a good Pinot. The thing about Pinot is it is light. If you have a big full-bodied Pinot, you might like it. It might be a good drink, but it's not a good Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is supposed to be light-bodied and elegant and nuanced. And the thing I always say is, and this is what you see in a lot of Pinots, not exclusively or not entirely, but California Pinot Noir can taste more like Merlot or Cabernet or something, like very oaked, very ripe, high alcohol, bigger, and it entirely defeats the point of Pinot. It may be delicious. You may think it's a good drink, but when you're talking about like varietal typicity, and what's best about Pinot is that they say that it is the best transmitter of terroir, meaning you can taste where a Pinot comes from the sense of place more than any other grape. You can taste Prince Edward County from Niagara, from Naramata Bench to McMinnville, Oregon, to Burgundy, to wherever, because it's just so nuance rich. And it's never, if you make it really ripe or over oaked, you're going to get this big overarching flavor of like super ripe jamminess or oakiness or something that's going to hide all of the little layers, those nuances. And those nuances are what we want. That's the point of Pinot Noir. And that's why like so many wine geeks and wine collectors, it's almost like the end game is always Burgundy. It's like that's like all the old folks that have been wine lovers their whole lives that are now 80, like ask them, like Burgundy is where they're at. Like they've followed all around the Monopoly trail past go and collected $200 enough times that now they get where to hone in on. And the beauty about Ontario is that our climate is so conducive to keeping that balance and that acidity, and also the fact that we are on so much limestone here is a huge factor. If you look at Burgundy, it is calcareous limestone and red clay. What do we have in Prince Edward County? Calcareous limestone and red clay. What do we have in Niagara? Dolomitic limestone and red clay. Dolomitic limestone, it's a younger version of an older version of calcareous. And it's the fact that it's limestone that gives so much character. And so when tasting this, you get a little bit of the barrel on the nose. There's a little bit of oakiness there that might just be this slightly riper vintage, but then you get that spice, a little bit of earthiness, that kind of dark cherry character. And then there's more of that cherry on the palate, like fresh turned earth, almost like potting soil. This one doesn't move into, often Pinots can be quite funky and earthy, like a barnyard sort of character. Sometimes like it sounds really funny to anybody not in the industry or who's not really into wine tasting, but when you talk about barnyard manure, like a funky, like literally like poopy kind of taste, like, oh, that's disgusting. Why would you want that? It's actually kind of a sought after, interesting note. And it's like, no, we don't like to drink poop, but we kind of like to smell wine that has hints of it, which is weird outside of the industry, but it's something that Pinot Noir is really famous for. Always remember a wine tasting I did early in my career with Jacques Ladier, who was the head winemaker of Louis Jadot in Burgundy for about 40 years before he retired. And he was really getting his nose in on this wine and like looked kind of perplexed and then like suddenly happy about it. And he said something in French, and my French is poor at best. And so I asked somebody, oh, what did he just say? What was that? And they're like, how do you say, yes, there is the chicken shit. And I was like, oh, nice. Okay, well, it's good to know that one of the most important people in Burgundy ever, or at least in the last 100 years, is talking about tasting notes in that context, but also seeing them positively. So in Ontario, we can get this as well too. This particular one, I'm not getting earthiness in like a barnyard kind of way, more of a fresh turned earth or potting soil kind of way. I don't know if anybody else is picking up on something in that type of wheelhouse, but it's just reminding me of like cherries and like when you bust open a bag of potting soil in the early spring for your garden and you get that kind of waft of like fresh, clean earth. But yeah, and the other thing about Taz is they were the second biodynamic winery in Canada. So they are all, and the first was Southbrook, of course. So they have been leaders in organics and biodynamics since, I think it was 2006 when they did that. And I think Southbrook might have been 2004, something like that. So yeah, very ecologically responsible operation, both under Taz and Redstone, and delicious, elegant, old school wines. I don't know if there's any comments or questions. somebody's saying that among home brewers, we use pure strains of Brettanomyces. So Brett is something that definitely exists in wine as well too, but you would never add it. Winemakers strive heavily to exclude it, and some old wineries will have hints of it. But the thing about Brett, when you're not doing it in a super controlled situation, like a sterile, almost clinical setting of a brewery where you're adding strains, it's something that if it gets loose inside the winery, it will grow, and then you can't get rid of it. And hints and nuances of Brett add interesting and wonderful things, but if you have too much Brett, it's ruined, and like everything will go sideways, and you have to essentially excavate your winery to fully like clear it out and clean it up and get rid of it. Yeah, people are talking about cherry, vanilla notes from the oak, and violet. Yep, absolutely, all of the above. Lots of cool tasting notes, but doesn't look like there's any specific questions. So yeah, why don't we wrap that up there? Because I think I didn't finish early at all. I'm right on, right on time here. So I'll hand it back over to David.
Thank you. Et pour résumer en français, je ne vais pas répéter toute son analyse technique, mais j'aimerais souligner que un thème commun est que le contexte du wine est très important, particulièrement où les raisins, d'où viennent les raisins, et que c'est une marque d'une région mature devant que leur emphase, c'est sur ce qu'on fait le mieux. Mais au contraire, il y a des régions où on essaie de faire pousser tous les cépages qui sont populaires. Mais ici au Canada, nous sommes encore jeunes, mais quand même, particulièrement en Ontario, on profite de nos avantages. Particulièrement le climat est relativement frais. Et nos sols sont variés, mais il y a beaucoup de calcaire. Et ces deux choses ensemble, ça veut dire que c'est très bon pour quelques cépages plus que d'autres, par exemple le Riesling et le Pinot Noir, les vins que nous avons bu ce soir. La même chose en ce qui concerne la Nouvelle-Écosse. C'est une région jeune encore. C'est trop frais pour les grands vins rouges. Mais c'est très bon pour les vins qui sont fabriqués du processus méthode traditionnelle pour les vins pétillants. Yeah. Okay. So let's turn to questions from the floor. One question that we got was, do Ontario Pinots age well?
That depends on how they're made. If they're made in well and made in a way to age, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like great Burgundy can age over 50 years. We don't have that type of history in Ontario yet to really see, but I have Pinots in my cellar from 2005 onward that I don't think I've had one yet that is past, that's gone. So they definitely have the acidity and also tannin like to last. But it will really depend on which one and how it's made. You can't speak for each specific winery and how they produce it, but yes, Pinot Noir does have the ability to age, and Ontario is making high enough quality versions of it for sure to age 10, sometimes, well, I don't know, I can't say 20 years for sure. I would guess 20 years based on the 15 or so that I've had. I'm trying to think of probably the oldest Pinot I've had in Ontario. It would probably be from the late 90s, and it was still good when I would have had it in the last couple of years. So yes, with an if it's made that way.
One comment from Alex is that we love your body language. Do you have a YouTube channel?
My body language. Oh man, now I'm going to be self-conscious. What do I do with my hands?
I don't think it was directed to you though.
Oh,
what's that?
Oh, it was about Chris.
Okay.
I think it's a good question. Where can we see more of you?
Of me or Chris?
You.
Oh.
Other than the shop.
I don't have a YouTube channel. On Instagram, I guess, or at the shop. Before COVID, I used to have a podcast about country music, but that's irrelevant to this. Yeah, no, I don't really have any kind of online platform beyond my Instagram.
Okay. Last question from Louis Claude. Why are local wines more expensive than French or Italian?
I would not say that is true. So there's a lot of very expensive French and Italian wines, but we also get the very cheapest things imported. If you go to the LCBO, to the French or Italian section, you're going to see some very large mass market brands that are international brands that produce millions and millions of cases, that, back to like earlier conversations where we were touching on like the sales end of things with Debbie, where it's essentially a race to the bottom on pricing to compete. The quality isn't necessarily there. Ontario, I think, and I think Asha could better speak to this, but I think there is a price floor that like you can't charge less than a certain amount for a bottle of wine in Ontario. I forget what that price is, but it's regulated. So if you wanted to, often like I have clients that are traveling to the US or somewhere and they come back and they're like, oh man, I had like $2 chuck and it was so good for like a $2 bottle of wine. Why can't we have that here? Short answer is it's regulated that we can't. There's a certain amount that you have to charge more than. But the other answer is that aside from like the Pellers or Jackson Triggses that are more industrial type of operations, the majority of producers in Canada are boutique, small farmers, growers, and they don't have the scale to be able to offer something that inexpensive. So when you see the $15 to $20 wines that are pretty much the least expensive things from like a craft type of producer in Ontario or Canada, that's kind of it. And I would even push that a bit further to say that we have more relative value in Ontario than a lot of the other places. When we talk about some of the great wines, like from Prince Edward County or BC or Niagara that are, say, $35, $45, $55, a lot of people are wondering, this is insane. Why would you pay $50, $45 for a Canadian Pinot Noir? It doesn't make sense, particularly when their neighbor is charging $19.99 or something for all of their wines. There has been an onslaught of Canadian producers that have blazed the trail for really high-end wines. So examples are like Thomas Batchelder, Taz, like talking about Pinot Noir here. There was a number of articles in like the last 6, 7, 8 years that started coming out in the World of Fine Wine from the UK, from Decanter, and from the Wine Spectator that would name a number of people like pre-scandal Norman Hardy wines and Taz wines and Thomas Batchelder wines.
Martin's Lane.
Yeah, they put these on the map as like specifically those first 3 were often top 3 wines in North America for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And so when these critics from UK or from the US are rating them on the same level that they're rating Grand Cru or Premier Cru Burgundies, those wines cost $200, $300, $400, $150 minimum. And now you can get these wines from Niagara or Prince Edward County for $45. That's not an overpriced expensive wine because it's double the price of their neighbor. That quality of what they're doing is a relative value when you zoom out and bring your context to an international scale, because it's not Burgundy, but it's in the same wheelhouse of what they're doing. And a lot of international critics and consumers are seeing them in this light. So I think that we're very lucky to have this as our domestic market. Yes, we don't have a $2 chuck type of option, or like the $6.99, $7.99 Italian wine at the LCBO, but everything else we do have is like very reasonably priced, particularly on the high end. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but I've had many conversations and discussions about this exact topic over the years.
Yeah.
Andrew, I just wanted to jump in that floor price you're referring to was the social referencing price. And
Yeah.
I think for Ontario, I'm trying to find the number because I was actually just working on this. I think it's around $6.95 or $7.
I think I was going to say it's somewhere in the $7 range, because I don't think I've ever seen something less than $7 from Ontario. And yeah, and I'm sure some of those big companies could do it if it was allowed, but it's not.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of our members were concerned when the Tinto Bravo or whatever it was called hit the shelves, because I think they were selling it for like the actual minimum price you can sell it for. So obviously that's taking market share away from, international Canadian blends and lower price VQA wines. So, but I can definitely try to find that number and put it in the chat once I have more clarity on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Those wines were fantastic, and we loved your commentary. So we're a little behind schedule, but we still have about 14 minutes left for networking and discussion about wine in the breakout groups. That's the final session of the evening. You have your choice of 3 rooms, one in English, une en français, et une autre bilingue. Audrey, can you tell us how to select a room, please?
Absolutely. So welcome everyone to the networking portion. I am now opening the rooms for the breakout sessions. So as you can see, they have been open now. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you can choose which room you would like to join. You can self-select on your own. And if you need any assistance, I can also help move you. So is everyone seeing that right now? Can you click and choose your breakout room?
Quick question. As the panelists, are we immediately by default in our own breakout room, or do we have to choose it?
Andrew, I can move you to your room.
Okay.
If there's any difficulty, if you can post out, you don't see the option. Okay, let me just retry that again. Sorry, all. All right, does everyone see the option now to self-select? Yes, yes, it just appeared perfect. Sorry for the technical difficulty. So you can join the room of your choice. So it's in the menu bar at the bottom. If we still don't see it, Chris, I can move. If you type in whichever room you want to join, English, French, bilingual, I can move you to it. All right. Just manually moving some people right now. You should see the little option to click join room once you see it.